it's all said and done, and we look back over our lives, I think every one of us wants to look back and feel as if we have been successful. I don't know anybody that starts out in this life wanting to be a failure. Now I know sometimes in our life we end up with failures, and if we're not careful, we can have a tendency to think that we are failures because we fail. But most all of us want to be a success. We want other people to think of us as successful, as having some type of success in this world. And we can all have different definitions of success. So some people have defined success by the amount of money in their bank account or the position that they had. Others define success as finishing with the one that you started with in your marriage, or having kids that are successful and actually move out of the house and are successful. Or other people have definitions of success that they have a good character. Whatever it is, however we want to define ourselves, either rightly or wrongly, and the Bible, by the way, says some things about how we should define success. All of us, I think, want to be successful. But today I don't want to talk about success. Neither do I want to talk about failure. But I want to talk about something that's even more challenging, at least more challenging to me, and that is dealing with the success of other people. Now, I don't know if you have a challenge with that or not, but I have a tendency in my life to kind of look around at other people and evaluate how well I'm doing based upon how they're doing. Now, hopefully you're not like I am, but when I'm on Facebook, which is rarely, the only time I'm on Facebook is to make you jealous of wherever I am. And I'll take a picture of a beach if I'm at a beach, and I'll take a picture of something happy, but I never tell you otherwise. And so if you don't see me on Facebook, it's because I'm not anyplace fun, not anyplace cool. But oftentimes people, even on Facebook, are saying, look how successful I am, and they're sending you pictures of success, and you don't see the other things that happen. So what I want to talk about, not because it's a challenge of mine, though it is, and not because it's a challenge of you, but you and I are going to deal with a lot of people in this world who we may deem more successful than us, and the Bible teaches us how to respond to that. Now typically you and I will respond with envy, oftentimes, which is why we have green slides today, being green with envy, all right? And then sometimes we will call it jealousy. But really the reason we want to talk about this is because when where we are in our study of 1 Samuel, we find an experience where the king, Saul, becomes envious and jealous of David, and that envy and that jealousy ends up costing Saul everything. In fact, when you come to 1 Samuel chapter 16, we find these words. And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he, David, became his armor bearer. This is a very important position. Armor bearer is a very needed person. It's somebody that's really close to you, somebody that you have a lot of confidence in. And in 1 Samuel 16, Saul loves David. But when we come to chapter 18, Saul raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. That's how David got there. He was a great harp player. It wasn't because he was killing Goliath. It was because he could play the harp that he got to move into the palace. And he got to play for Saul, so anytime Saul went a little crazy, David played for him. Saul would be happy. But in chapter 18, Saul had his spear in his hand one day, and Saul hurls the spear at David because he's thinking, I must kill David. In fact, he does this twice. He tries to spear David with the spear, and David leaves and comes back and plays music for him again, and Saul does it again. What happened between this relationship in 2 chapters where Saul loves him and makes him his armor bearer to 2 chapters later he is trying to kill him? Well, it's the same thing that can happen to us. You see, position between chapter 16 and chapter 18, David has this tremendous success. And you know the success, right? You've been in church, you've been in Sunday school. You've seen that. It was in chapter 17 that David kills Goliath. If you don't know the story, very quickly, Goliath, bad. David, good. Goliath, overrated. David, underrated. David killed Goliath. All right, that's kind of how the story goes. We've got the underdog there, David, who goes up against Goliath, who is this massive giant that nobody from the Israelites, none of the Hebrews, none of the Jewish people want to go fight Goliath, because he is so big, and Goliath comes out every day, mocks God, trash talks with the best of them, and intimidates the entire people. Saul himself is intimidated. But when David shows up delivering groceries to his older brothers, he says, "Who is this guy that you're letting him talk about God that way? I will go kill him." And everybody's like, "What? You're just a young man, and you can't go and do that." And David says, "Yes, I can, because I've done all these other things. God has protected me." And so he goes out there and he kills Goliath, and it's this huge shock. In fact, this army, the Philistines, who've been mocking the Israelites, putting pressure on them, when Goliath is killed and David holds up his head to show all of them, all the Philistines go back to their mommy, and they leave Israelites alone. And so after that, we have chapter 18. In chapter 18, verse 6, as they're coming home from this great battle, and we're going to be in chapter 18 for most of our time today. And as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistines, the women came out of all of the cities of Israel. And they were singing and they were dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and with songs of joy and with musical instruments. As you can imagine, they do. Right? I mean, that's a great party when you have a victory. They're showing last season's top 25 football games on one of our ESPN channels. And so, big football fan, it's kind of helping me get through the summertime when we got all this baseball happening, kind of gets in the way of football season. So I'm getting to watch some of those games, and these are the best games of all last year, and so it's fun to watch the celebrations. You know how the celebrations are when your team wins. Well, this is what it is. The ladies are coming out, they're singing, they're dancing, they have tambourines and all that kind of stuff, and everything is great, and everybody's having this great celebration, and Saul is there, and then the women sing this particular song. They sing, Saul, and I don't know the tune to it, so I'm not going to sing it to you. I'll just have to read it to you. But Saul has struck down his thousands. And Saul goes, yeah, I like that. That's a good song. Could we sing that one again? Let's just talk about that. I've killed my thousands. And he's all good with that until they come to the second verse, the second line, where they sing, and David has killed his tens of thousands, or 10,000s. Saul did not like that. Because when Saul compared his success to David's success, he realized that David's success was more successful than his success. It doesn't say that Saul hasn't done anything. Have you noticed this? And Saul sits around the palace doing nothing. That's not the song they're singing, right? They're singing, Saul has killed his thousands. I don't know about you, but if I'm up against a battle against somebody, I don't know that I'm going to be able to whoop 1,000 different guys. Now think about this. They're attributing to Saul killing 1,000 people. You are a great warrior. Maybe if it went, to the guys that are smaller than I, maybe I might get to take one or two, but I'm not going to be 1,000. And so that's a huge success. That's a big success. And if anybody said that to us, he's gotten 1,000 business deals done. I don't know what we would think about. Or he's hit 1,000 home runs, or 1,000 holes in one, or whatever it is, 1,000 of. You would think that'd be pretty good. But when they sang about Saul's success and David's success, they increased David's success by tenfold. And even though Saul had tremendous success, that bothered Saul. In fact, not only did it bother him, but it says what? That Saul was angry. Isn't that funny? You ever thought about this? Saul is the king, and his armies are defeated. God sends a way for his armies to win, and Saul gets angry. Because he looks and says, somebody else gets the credit for this success. And not only was Saul angry, but he was what? Very angry. Why is that? And the saying displeased him. Why is that? Well, jealousy has a tendency to come out in us when we have regret that is pushed outward. Oftentimes, jealousy will sneak up upon us when we have some regret of something that we were supposed to do or some kind of guilt, and God honors the other person instead of us when it should have been us. And so we look around and say, well, that's not right. That we get jealous of that other person. Do you remember when Saul was first called? Happens in 1 Samuel chapter 8. And in 1 Samuel chapter 8, the people are crying out for a king. And when they call out for a king, they say this, there will be a king over us, because Samuel's saying not a good idea. They said, no, there should be a king over us, that we may also be like all the other nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and what? Fight our battles. See, Saul's job as king is to go fight battles. That's why they wanted a king. And when Goliath comes and mocks God's people, it scares Saul, and Saul doesn't do what he's supposed to do as king. Something else interesting. Do you remember how tall Saul was? Remember what the scriptures say about Saul? It says that he was a full head and shoulders, essentially, taller than all of the other Hebrews. Now, Goliath was a big, bad dude, no doubt about it. According to the way that you understand scriptures, he could be anything from 8 foot tall to 11 foot tall. That's tall even by NBA standards. That would be really tall. But the scriptures say that of all of the Hebrews, the tallest dude that they had was Goliath, and it should have been, it should have been Saul, and Saul's job should have been gone out there to attack and defend against Goliath, because he was the one that was supposed to do it. He is king, he is the tallest guy, but what does he do? He doesn't do what he's supposed to do. And sometimes in our life, when we don't do what we're supposed to do, and somebody else does what they're supposed to do, and God honors them, then you and I can have a tendency toward jealousy, and that jealousy is our regret of what we have done pushed out upon other people. That's what happens to Saul. And if we're not careful in our life, we will look at other people who are successful, and we will say, that should have been me. I should have done that. And if we're not careful, that becomes a way that our adversary begins to build into us something that can end up tragic if we don't get a hold of it, right? So guilt pushed outward. Beyond that, though, he said this, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? What I want you to do is follow along Saul's thinking and see how jealousy gets a hold of us. Saul says, that was my job. I should have done that. So what other things, what else is left that David could take? And he thinks to himself, the only thing that he can take now is the kingdom. Do you know that's what drives our jealousy oftentimes? What drives our jealousy is what I call the presumption of violation. The presumption of violation. Here's what I mean by that. Sometimes when God blesses somebody else, and they have success, we have a tendency to think that we are wronged and that their blessing ought to be my blessing. Now hopefully you're not in this role or in this realm, but this can happen to all of us if we're not careful. Here's what Saul did. Saul looks around and says, this guy has got everybody cheering for him, and I'm the king, everybody's supposed to cheer for me. The only thing else that he doesn't have that he could take is being king. And so Saul becomes jealous of David because now he is afraid that he might become king. Now here's something that's kind of interesting, though. Whose job was it to determine who was going to be king? Was that Saul's job? It was whose job? It was God's job to determine who was going to be king. Was the kingdom Saul's? No, it wasn't Saul's kingdom. It was God's kingdom, and Saul had been called to rule and reign in that position. Here's what's funny about us. We assume that all of God's blessings should flow to me. We oftentimes think that I am the one because I'm doing what's right. All the blessing ought to be me. And when some of that blessing doesn't come our way, it goes to somebody else. That troubles some of us. Does this ever happen to you? It happens in Baptist life all the time, because when pastors get together, the first conversation everybody has, well, how big is your church? How's your church running? How many people you got? Okay? Now, I know you don't do that in your business. I know you don't do that in your world. I understand that. But Baptist preachers, we have nothing to do. And so when we get together, we start talking about how many people are there. All right? And so sometimes we begin to talk about that. And I know that sometimes in my life, I will look around and I will know a pastor, and he will have had a bigger church than I have, and I look at him and say, God, don't you know that guy? I mean, I sat in seminary with this guy. He never did his homework, right? He never paid attention. And God, you're going to bless that guy rather than me? What is wrong with you, God? Now, I know that sounds silly. I know it sounds silly. But you know what? That can creep into us, can it? It can creep into your business, and you can start talking business. Well, how many people did you have stay at your hotel last night? Well, we were 98% full. And you're going around, don't you know this guy? This is the guy, God, who cheats at stuff. This is the guy who doesn't pay his taxes. He steals the pencils from the hotel. He does all those kind of things, and you're blessing him. I ought to be getting all that blessing, God. And we forget that blessing is not ours to pass out. Blessing, success, good, that's God's to give whoever he wants to. And sometimes we begin to presume that we've been violated because we haven't been blessed, because we know all these things about everybody else. And God looks at us and says, yes, I know about him, but did you know that I also know about you? It's a little surprise to us sometimes that maybe we don't compare so favorably. And so that's what's happening to Saul. Saul's like, this guy is going to come and get the kingdom, which, by the way, didn't Saul already know that he had lost the kingdom? And don't you remember in the passage before, Samuel comes and says, Saul, you've lost the kingdom. It shouldn't be any surprise to Saul that he's going to lose the kingdom. In fact, if Saul was the man who was after God's heart, he would have resigned the kingdom immediately once Samuel said that, but he tried to hold on to that because he presumed that was his to keep when it's not. All right? Does that make sense to you? Do you know anybody like this? I'm about jealousy today, and y'all are all quiet today. I don't know why. It's maybe hitting a little closer to home than what I anticipated. But presumption of violation, that's another reason. But it gets worse. After that, because he saw David in that way, Saul eyed David from that day on. What does this mean? Well, jealousy grows from maybe some regret, maybe some violation, but it grows so that you might have a confirmation of your suspicion. Have you ever been in a situation where somebody's looking for the worst in you? Have you ever been in a business like that? Maybe they don't like you there, and so they start watching for every little thing that you do wrong, and they write it down. Okay? That's what Saul started doing with David. He started looking for the worst in people. Oh, yep, I knew he's going to be that way. Yep. He didn't do this. No. We write it down. In our marriages, we can get that way too. We start keeping a list, and here's what you do. When you do that, that is about the worst thing you can do. In fact, the best thing that we can do for each other is to believe the best about each other. See, when there's a concern or a question on our staff, I had this question just recently. If this happened and this person said something about your staff member, what would you do? And I said, well, here's what I would do. I would say, that sure doesn't sound like that person. That sure doesn't sound like their heart, sure doesn't sound like what they would want. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go investigate and see if that's true, and then I'll come back and tell that to you. That's the best thing that you can do, is to believe in each other and give each other the benefit of what? The doubt. Because love covers what? A multitude of sins. But that's not the way Saul was. Saul started looking for every little thing David did, and everything that he could get that was confirmation that there was something wrong with him, and he was being wronged, God was wronging Saul, he went with it. But it gets even worse, and I don't have time to go through all the chapter to break all this down, but several other things happened here. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him. That's why he's afraid of David, because he had departed from Saul. There is regret there because the Spirit was with Saul. Now he's with David, and that bothers Saul, and instead of repenting and turning, he just gets jealous of David. So Saul removes him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. Now, we don't know why he did that. One, just to get him out of his hair. Also, if you're a commander of 1,000, there's a chance you're going to be in battle, and there's a chance that something bad might happen to you. So whatever the reason, he puts him out there, and he went out and came in before the people. But notice, why did Saul do this with David? Because with jealousy, that jealousy grows so that not only are you confirming all the bad stuff that you see, confirmation of suspicion, but you also become afraid. And you start living in fear. But then it gets worse. I don't have time to develop all this. And David has success in all his undertakings. That's even worse. Saul gets him out of his presence, gives him an opportunity to get killed. David turns it and gets even more success. Doesn't that drive you crazy when you try to set up somebody for failure and they do better? Doesn't that drive you crazy? Is it just me? Maybe just me. And when Saul saw, I'll try to say that 14 times quickly. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. That all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and he came in before them. What happens when you become afraid? Then you have a dread. See, it's one thing to be afraid of something, but then there's something even deeper than that, to be dreadful of that. I mean, you can be afraid of going to the dentist because they're just not nice people, right? They're in your mouth, they're sticking things in there. There's something to be a healthy fear of them, right? God's put a fear into us so that we don't do dumb things. But then there's a level of going, I'm afraid to go to the dentist, but you go anyway. But then there's a fearful that you don't want to go to the dentist and you begin to dread going to the dentist. You know the difference what I'm talking about? Maybe it's not the dentist. Maybe you like your dentist. That's okay. I don't know. Dentists are good people. Jesus can love them too. But whatever it is, you can move from fear to dread. And then after you become dreadful of that in jealousy, jealousy has a way of getting even deeper in you. And there's so much going on in this chapter. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David and that he was with Michal, actually in the Hebrew, Michal, but you got to have some spit in the back of your throat to say that. Michal, which was the wife now, Saul's daughter loved him. Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy for how long? Continually. See, that dread moves to obsession. And what I want you to understand is this jealousy has a way of becoming so invasive in your life and in my life and in our life that it ultimately will destroy us. You know the rest of the story of Saul. Saul gets so crazy that he's trying to kill David at every turn. There's a chapter in the scriptures where David gets helped by some priests, some religious, spiritual guys, and Saul goes in and kills all 85 of them because they had helped David. This man goes crazy with his obsession, and that's what jealousy does, so much so that at the end of Saul's life, he takes his own life because he is so damaged by that obsession. So, what we want to talk about in the last couple of minutes is how we can overcome jealousy. All right, just got a couple minutes to do this. We want to talk about overcoming jealousy because all of us have a tendency to be jealous. We all have a tendency to look at somebody else's success and be worried about that and allow that to cause all of these problems, this progression that it will destroy us. Now, a quick little story. I'm going to try this. It may not work, but I'll try it anyway. At camp where my sons go to Kanakuk Camp, and at K7, they have all these crazy cheers at Kanakuk. And that week, when your kids come back home, you can say just about any word, and there is a cheer associated with that word, right? You know what I'm talking about? And so you say this word, and they start cheering. And so one of the things that they have is that they have the Overcomer Award at camp. And this is an award for the kid who goes up on the tall thing and gets scared but does it anyway, all right? And so they have this cheer, and the cheer goes, they're introducing this award, and it's called the Overcomer Award. This is not going to work. I can tell from the look in your faces this is not going to work. But here's what it goes. I'll try it anyway for risk. What this guy says is they talk about the Overcomer Award, and every time they say Overcomer, everyone in the audience says what, Travis? Coming over. That's what you always say, right? So, overcomer, coming over. All right, that's actually better than what I was giving you credit for. I apologize for that. You were actually with me on that. So, we're going to talk about the overcomer, how we overcome jealousy, all right? That's not going to work. All right, we're running out of time for that. Here's the first way you do that. How do you overcome? Yeah, never mind. Stop. What is the word? Tatanka? Is that what you say? The tatanka is the magic word that you say that then it stops all cheers. All right, because if you don't do that, then you'll be cheering all day long. So it's tatanka. So I've said tatanka. So you don't get to say the rest of the stuff. All right. So maybe that'll work later. Didn't work today. All right. So overcoming jealousy. How do we do that? Because we know it can get at us. Here's what can happen. We should mind the right gap in our jealousy. What does that mean? Well, you know, in Europe, got the London Olympics coming, that when you get on the subway there, the underground, all that kind of stuff, they have these signs that say mind the gap. And the gap is between you and this platform and the train. So you're supposed to watch that before you get on there. Well, oftentimes what we will do with other people when we're jealous of them, we will look at us now, and we will look at them, and we will look at the gap between us. And we will look at them and say, well, they're smarter, they're richer, they're taller, whatever it is, and we will look at them and we will concentrate our efforts between us and them. That's what Saul did. Saul looked at David and said, David is closer to God, David's got all the cheers, that's not right, that's not fair. And he concentrates on that and he thinks about that, and the Bible says, as a man thinks, what? So is he. That's what the scripture says. What you concentrate on is what you become. And so rather than concentrating on the us and them, what we should do and what Saul should have done is to concentrate on how far God has brought us from where we were to where we are now and concentrate on that area. You know, I think about my parents. My parents probably grew up much like you, dirt poor. I mean, they didn't have nothing. And then I've noticed what has happened in their life is they have worked hard, been faithful to God. They have gone from where they were to where they are now. And that is a huge gap. And instead of concentrating on all the people who have more, what we choose to do is to concentrate on what God took us from to where we are and see that growth. And then we are able to praise God for what he has done. See the difference in that? The difference is Saul, if you remember, was a nobody. Saul was one who was hiding when they called his name. He was hiding among the baggage. You remember that? You can read the scripture and say that. And God took him and gave him great success so that the women were cheering for Saul that you've killed thousands. That's a great deal. From somebody who was nothing to somebody who's going, that's kind of success. But we have a tendency to not look at that success from where God has brought us. We look at somebody else's success, and when we do that, jealousy will eat us alive. Does that make sense? Second, Tatanka, so you can't say it, remember? All right. Overcoming jealousy. How do you overcome jealousy? Well, you mind the right gap. But secondly, you should look for encouragement, not envy. And I tried to visualize this picture-wise, and I couldn't do it, so here's what I've done. Instead of concentrating on somebody else's forest that they've grown, okay? This is going to be a little abstract for some of you, okay? Instead of focusing on somebody else's forest, go plant your own tree. Does that make sense? Instead of looking at how great they are and how wonderful they are and going, man, this is how great, go become that. Instead of Saul looking at David going, you are so close to God, God's presence with you, and worrying about that, he should have said, I've got to do something to grow in my presence to God. So instead of being obsessed about somebody else's forest of trees, go plant your own tree. Develop that within your own life. And then Tatanka, remember again, overcoming jealousy. What's the third way to do that? We've got to recognize their flaw. Do you know some of the people that look like they have such great success are really not that successful? You know that a lot of people spend their time trying to make you think that they're successful? Talking in Indianapolis, you can read about in the worship guide, I was talking to one of the church planners there, and he said, I went into this really, really expensive home and sat on lawn chair furniture inside their house. And this is where I was going to speak anathema. I was going to speak against Chick-fil-A because that's anathema to speak against Chick-fil-A. But I go in there and I get their fruit cup, and their fruit cup has strawberries and oranges and grapes on top. And I like strawberries and oranges and grapes on top, but you know what's underneath all that? Apples. I don't like apples. You may like apples. I don't like apples. And so you got all this thing that looks really good on the outside, but once you order and you get it, it's just full of apples. I'm sorry to speak against Chick-fil-A. They're wonderful. They love the Lord and all kind of stuff. But you know what? People try to put the best stuff out for you to see so that you might become jealous about it. And that's a little more abstract. Some of you have worry about that when you think about that in Sunday school when your Sunday school teacher's teaching. But you know what? A lot of us will look at somebody and we will think they've all got it together, and you know what? They don't. In fact, you know what? David looked like he had it all together, but you know that David had the same issues happening in his own life? Do you know that David's own son rebelled against him and took the kingdom away from him? You know that he didn't end up being this great father figure of all the things that he was supposed to be? All those things happened to David, and we have a tendency to look at what's best in somebody else and not see the rest of who they are and not see that their success that we're so worried about is not a complete success, it's just a partial success. And so here's what we've got to recognize. There is one who has complete success that we should follow. In fact, we implore you on behalf of Christ, 2 Corinthians 5 says, be reconciled to God. For our sake he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Why do we talk about all these things? It's because you and I, if we're not careful, we will let other people's success drive us to jealousy and push us away from God and find ourselves destroyed by our own jealousy. It's exactly what happened to Saul, and he can do that to you if you do not guard your heart. So what is the solution? We mind the gap and recognize what God has done for us. Not what he's done for somebody else, but where he has brought us through his salvation that he gives to us. And all we have to do to receive that is to repent and believe of our sin, of our faith in him. Repent of our sin and believe in him. All those things happen. And ultimately, other people's success does not matter. It is the success that God has given us and brought us through. So this week, as we see people who are all of these things that we don't think we have, may we lean on the recognition that God has brought us success through his own Son. And the greatest success is not owning stuff or having things, but the greatest success is that God is taking us from our sin to forgiveness through his Son, Jesus Christ. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes this morning? I don't know where you are